12 Beers of Christmas 2022. We're giving ourselves yet another present from DonO's basement. It's a Dawson recipe. Chuck is just here freeloading like you do on the holidays every now and then.
Just the guy.
So this is Storm in a Teacup Barleywine. You might remember this beer. DonO, Dawson, and I somehow collectively brewed this nearly 4 years ago. So we want to do a little check-in and tell you what a barley wine made of 100% Chevallier, some Target for bittering, and then was there charges throughout? Really? Man. Yeah, and then a pub yeast from Imperial that had run through a wild rice mild, basically as a starter, a low-gravity beer. And man, it is... Whew. It's in good shape.
Yeah.
Depending on what you like about this kind of beer.
11.3% alcohol. We figured that out. There is a little bit of a, if you look for it, there's a little bit of alcohol in the nose, which isn't surprising. Light oxidation that most of these people are saying they do not find unpleasant. I wouldn't say that I do either, I guess. But yeah, it's softened a little bit, smoothed out. It was a bitter.
It's still
bitter. A bitter mama, and it's still
as it's warming
a
up.
little
I'm
bit
like, man, it's surprisingly
bitterness still.
Bitter. We all kind of likened it to maybe these harvest ales or these vintage ales that you might get from Fuller's, or is it Harvey's that does the harvest?
Yes,
or no, Lee's.
J.W. Lee's.
Yeah. I mean, when you
Thomas
open
Hardy.
those, they kind of have these cooked fruit, sherry notes. You pointed out.
Yeah, like orange marmalade, little bit of
Plum
caramel.
or prune or something.
I think the interesting thing to note about this beer is it has some things that folks will characterize as out of place in certain beers, but they all work really well in this beer. So, like example, that oxidation. The bitterness I think is welcome, but I think the bitterness also might just be a function of how well attenuated it is. So if this had finished 7, 8, 9 points higher, I think that bitterness might play to bring the sweet in balance. But this time, like, it makes the alcohol a little less noticeable.
I'm surprised 4 years in how bitter it's still hanging on.
Well, we haven't mentioned Bigfoot barley wine, but that's a beer that is pretty bitter when it's fresh, and even after 4 to plus however many years, if you ever collect those, it will carry that. It'll carry that in through some years too.
And to speak of Chevallier, I mean, that's a base malt, but we're all getting certain kind of sea malt essences, specialty malt, like kind of what's the divide between that base malt's characters.
We were just talking off camera. It's like it's a pre-modern barley, and I really feel like it's kind of singular, right? Like I was just saying too off camera, I've made single malt milds, like much smaller grain bills, and they still come out about this color. It's a darker malt. It's not like a Marisot or a Golden Promise, right? Like maybe closer to a Munich.
I mean, by the color alone.
Yeah.
That is what it seems kind of like what we're getting.
Does a whole Munich beer or Vienna even get this dark?
I've seen 100% Munich beer that got definitely this dark.
Okay.
Like they call it Munich Monster at one of the homebrew cons or nano cons, and I was like, holy moly. That's like not quite porter at all, but still beyond kind of pale ale, at least from an American perspective.
And I love that little like hint of sea character. Like I would thought this was a lot richer grain bill than just a single malt barley wine, because this is my first time tasting it.
So what I wanted to use this as a springboard, because we try to do this, I try to do this, with the 12 Beers of Christmas is like, just if anybody has something to say about aging beers, maybe a beer that you had that was surprisingly successful, kind of like this after 3, 4, 5 years, and you maybe found it and you're like, oh my God, that's awesome. Or if you just have any tips for packaging something for aging that people might benefit from.
Only thing I've aged more regularly is these like American wild ales. So not just necessarily a high gravity thing. I mean, I have done a little bit of that, but I've done more of these like mixed culture blend things, and I'll bottle them. You want to bottle condition them probably, and yeah, I don't know. There's just not a trick to it. If you can store it cool-ish once it's carbonated, I think that helps slow the change for the worse. And yeah, there's no real tips or tricks, but like those types of beers, I mean, I've had like 5-year-old, you know, sour saison, sour batch kids, you know, whatever these different things blends I've had and made that they still are nice, like the sanctification type clone type things, and like those kind of ones still will hold up after that amount of time too.
Yeah, someone who's bottled some barley wine in his time, I think racking like good clean beer to package is probably thing one. And then I always bottle condition because I just felt that, you know, bottling, at least in my basement, is kind of an oxygen introducing process, and having yeast to gobble that up in addition to help carbonate the beer, I think just helps extend that shelf life, rather than just bottling it off the keg, dealing with it, whatever O2's in there, probably shortening.
What's the oldest beer you've ever opened and been pleasantly surprised at how well it held up?
When we moved my parents out of their house a few years ago, we had some bottles of Imperial Stout that were one of the first beers that my dad and I ever brewed. And so these were more than 10 but less than 20 years old when we found them. And they were, no, I beg your pardon, it wasn't an Imperial Stout, it was a Scotch ale. Yeah, more than 10, less than 20 years old. I still have a couple bottles. They held up really well.
Nice.
Yeah. It was not unlike this.
You had a big quad type beer. I don't know how old it was, but I know
It never got this old.
Okay. Not even 4 years.
That kid rode his bike off a cliff at a young age. There is something to be said for not holding a beer for too long. I would almost argue this goes for craft beer collectibles as well, but your homebrew, like, let them go. When they hit a peak, drink them over like a 3 or 4 month window. Not in one night. Not that first night that you realize they're good.
Well.
But I mean, these are not collectible items, shrink wrapped Star Wars characters. These are like, they're nearly living ale. They're probably at the end of being living ale, but like, drink them, enjoy them, share them. Don't stockpile them for an apocalypse that you have no idea when it's going to happen, right?
I used to do more of that, and then now I don't do as much of that. However, I still do have a bunch of Bigfoot barley wine that probably goes back 15 years. And like, I don't know. Some people just like to collect stuff for the sake of collecting.
They're better at packaging beer than we are.
That's true.
You can probably hang on to those beers for much longer.
Is their basement less of an oxygen introducing environment?
I think I feel safe saying yes.
The Grossman bottling apparatus is...
Yeah, when they're hand filling them with the bottling wand, they're very, very careful.
All right, y'all. Storming a Teacup. Recipe is in the video description. Hopefully there was something useful from our experience with aged beers and not letting them last too long. Till the next 12 beers of Christmas. Ciao for ciao.
Brew. Check the MFVD.